Let's speak to Richard Murphy, former chartered accountant, economic justice campaigner. Richard, good afternoon to you. I mean, even you, sir, would doff your cap to the mighty Lord Sugar with a tax contribution as big as that.
Well, he didn't make that tax contribution, did he? Let's be totally honest. That was the VAT that was paid by his customers. That was the tax paid by his employees, and much more besides. And all the business.
Well, it only happened because he set a company up that was very successful.
Yeah, well, I set up companies and paid a lot of tax, but I'm not going around writing false cheques and claiming that I paid.
Yeah, but you're
tax
probably not being accused of dodging any tax, are you?
No, I'm not. I haven't dodged any tax.
Whereas people on social media are always, oh, Alan Sugar, millionaire, you probably got the Cayman Island bank account. So he just thought, stuff you lot, I'll post a picture of my cheque.
Not everybody who's rich avoids tax. We know that. There are plenty of people who don't, and there are some people who do, and there's plenty of people on low income who also evade tax. We also know that to be true. Let's be clear, 40% of all small companies in the UK do not pay the corporation tax they owe. That's a fact. We know that's true. So this is a problem that goes right across society. It's one of the things that we do need to do and to solve if we are actually going to fill the supposed black hole, which I don't think exists. But if we were going to try and fill this supposed black hole, that's one of the things we could do, and we'd have to do it by investing more money in HM Revenue and Customs in the powers they've got to obtain information from banks on which small companies aren't paying tax in the UK. How much could you raise if you could actually identify every small company that is trading in the UK and get it to pay tax? Probably £12 billion a year. That would go a long way to meeting Rachel Reeves' demands for
just out of interest, just to interject for 1 second, in what respect do you sense that small businesses, because I had a conversation with my own accountant just last week, and he said, strangely enough, it's not the Amazons and the Googles that aren't paying the right amount of tax. They might not pay enough, but they're paying legally the right amount. He made kind of your point, Richard, that there's oddly a really interesting statistic that small businesses are not paying the right amount. But are they evading it or avoiding it?
Oh, they're evading it. The real problem is that they are setting up companies, they're trading for a year or so, then they let that company go, abandon it, they let Companies House strike it off, get rid of it, and they form a new company, and then another one, then another one, and another one. Yeah. And this has been so easy to do in UK company law that has become a successive problem. There are maybe hundreds of thousands of companies a year doing that. Now, let's also be clear, large companies are paying more tax now, and I'm partly responsible for that because I created something called country by country reporting, which was the tax system which exposed their use of tax havens. And now they can't do that without being notified to HM Revenue and Customs. And so HM Revenue and Customs do have a chance to demand the right tax from them. Yeah. And let's also be clear, that also applies to the wealthy, because another thing I worked on was getting information from tax havens on which wealthy people in this country are not paying their tax because they use such places. And in 2009, I was told we would never get information from those places. And in 2017, we did, partly because of work I did. So is
it not your moral duty, Richard, to avoid tax, surely?
No, of course it isn't. It's your moral duty to pay the tax that is due to the society in which you belong, because you have a right to live in it.
Well, indeed, but you want to avoid paying too much tax. You don't want to pay the tax you don't owe.
Look,
so if you don't owe it, you don't pay it, do you?
No, hang on. I'm not asking anybody to pay tax that is not owing.
That's what I'm saying. So it's your moral duty. If you can find a place where you don't have to pay it, fantastic, right?
Ian, let's be clear about this. The law exists. The law is there because democracy has put it into place, and I'm delighted that it has. And the law is there to be complied with. It's not voluntary. It's not a choice. And the law is pretty clear in most taxes. Not always. There's some ambiguities, but in the vast majority of cases, avoidance is actually getting not just around the spirit of the law, but sometimes even around the letter of the law. Okay. It's trying to find loopholes where there is abuse that is possible. And that is what is avoidance. And that is not within the spirit, or in fact within the letter of the law either now. So it is not your moral duty. It's just, if you want to see the inside of the prison wall, please feel free to go ahead and do it.
But indeed, and of course you should pay what you are due to pay. My point was that you shouldn't pay what you're not legally due to pay.
No, I'm not asking anyone to, and I don't pay more than I have to when I write a cheque, and I do because I'm self-employed, and so I have a bill to pay twice a year. Sure. That bill always looks to me like a big chunk of money disappearing from my bank account, and I don't pretend otherwise, but I pay it willingly for what I've got in exchange.
Okay. On the bigger point then that we're discussing here, Richard, Rachel, you said you didn't believe in the 22 billion black hole. I mean, we can maybe talk about that if we have time, but specifically in terms of where we should tax, because everyone becomes a sort of an armchair chancellor or an armchair accountant in these matters. I mean, I've always thought the idea that, you know, we are in the 40% plus department as a country, that's a failed nation, clearly.
No, we're not.
Nothing.
We're not in the 40% plus. We're only paying 35% tax. We're spending 40%, but we're not taxing that much. Let's be clear, we're not taxing that much.
What do you mean you're not taxing that much?
We don't collect as much tax as we spend. So we might be spending 40% of GDP, but we're not.
No, I'm talking about tax rates for individuals, sorry.
Oh, well, look, 40% tax is modest. Let's be clear.
It shouldn't be above 30%, not in the 21st century.
Why?
Why? But because it's obscene that a government would take, you know, let the government do better so that people who've done well and pay other people don't spend half of their money, Richard, in tax. That's not right. That's a failed economy.
Ian, let's stop talking the nonsense here, first of all. The people
I didn't say you were talking nonsense. I said you were talking nonsense, because the people who are wealthiest in the UK pay the overall lowest rates of tax in this country, and that's because a lot of their income is hidden in companies, and that only pays 25% tax, and a lot of their income is subject to capital gains, and that pays very low rates of tax, and so they actually aren't paying tax at all, or they quite legitimately but nonetheless hide their income from tax in things like pension funds and ISAs, and we have ISA millionaires. These people are not generating income because of their hard-earned effort. Many of them are just sitting back and enjoying. Well, if some people are able to do that, but you're illustrating a sort of more extreme example. If you talk about the average person that is doing very well, earning good money, whether they're a solicitor, whether they work in journalism, whether they're an engineer, they're doing rather well. They're at the top rate. They might have their pensions, their ISAs, and various other little things going on as well, but broadly they are paying a shed load of money to the economy. Are they the people
paying 50% or 40% even of income?
Not for the whole thing, you're not, but over a certain amount you are paying 45%, right? If you get to that certain rate.
You are paying 45%, but only over a certain amount.
Correct.
That doesn't mean to say. And those people also have the greatest opportunity to avoid tax. So in fact, the people who pay the highest rate of tax in the UK are the bottom 10% of income earners, and actually across almost all the rest, it's flat until you get to the top 90%, when the overall rate of tax goes down so heavily, because wealth is undertaxed in the UK. And the reason why is income from interest and from dividends and from rents and from trusts and from capital gains are all outside the scope of national insurance. So whereas working people, the real hard-working people of this country, actually are paying an extra 23% tax, which is the employer's rate plus the employee's rate. And the reason why you add the two together is very simple, because in fact wages are reduced by the value of the employer's contribution. They're paying 23% more tax than the wealthy who are living.
But it's a kind of a specious argument in many respects, this, isn't it? Because overarchingly, the rich pay more tax. We all know that if you
no, they don't. They only pay more tax as a proportion of their income. But
your premise, if you like, if I've got this right, Richard, and you know, we're not North Korea. You can have whatever premise you like. Seems to be that everything should be taxed. So if you earn money you should be taxed. Why? What's the obsession with tax?
The obsession with
if you can remove that kind of slightly anti-intellectual position from your belief system, you could get somewhere with this. But you're of the belief that we should tax everything.
Let me just present a counter-argument. You asked me a question. I suspect you would like the UK to be as successful as Germany. I suspect you would like it to be as successful as France or the Netherlands and many other European countries. And the reason why they're more successful... Sorry?
I don't know about Germany at the moment.
Well, Germany's doing pretty well, I mean, a lot better than us. And the point about that is they all pay more tax. They all have stronger states. They all provide better benefits. They all support their people better. They provide better education, and it's free of charge. And they provide better healthcare, and because they spend more on it than we do, on average 2% more of GDP than we do. It's not that our NHS doesn't work. We just don't give it enough money. And they spend more on childcare, so more women can carry on in work and everything else you can imagine. We simply do not have a big enough state in this country to make the country work. That's the reason why we don't function properly, Ian. Simple, straightforward.
So who do we you know, we have things like, you know, obviously dividends, they may well come under the spotlight at the next budget. There's been a lower tax rate if you're paying a dividend. I mean, there should be a much smaller tax rate for dividend. I would argue in terms of the incentive, you could take it on a graduated system, but for very small businesses.
We've got a graduated system. It's called a progressive tax system. And you just said the income tax rate goes goes up over time. So we've got it.
But there was all...
Your wish has been granted.
Yeah, well, not quite, because, of course, if you pay yourself a wage and you pay yourself a dividend, you will pay a lesser tax rate on the dividend than you would on the wage, right? I mean, that's...
And I would solve that problem by charging an investment income surcharge on the dividend, which would be the equivalent of national insurance, and that incentive to avoid tax.
So you want to tax it again?
I'm not taxing it again. I'm just taxing it fairly at the same rate as somebody who
You're obsessed with tax.
I'm not obsessed with tax.
Were you once attacked by a taxman or something? What happened to you, Richard?
I've run a lot of businesses very successfully in my career. I'm a chartered accountant. Well, I was a chartered accountant. I'm now retired. But the point about that is, if we don't pay enough tax, you will have people who are living on the streets because they won't be able to afford to live in properties.
I agree. I mean,
you'll have the NHS failing around us. So you will have education that does not prepare people for work. If you want those things, and we're already seeing that happening, if you go the way you're going, Ian, where you say you don't want to have tax, that will be what
I want to have tax. I want to have fair tax, and I don't want an obsession with tax. I want to look at other ways of doing things. Nonetheless, Richard, let me just ask you the sort of overarching question that we're exploring. Where do we tax then? What would be, if you were sitting there, Rachel Reeves was sitting in the chair opposite me and said, right, OK, Richard, a couple of tips for Rachel Reeves. Where should she tax or where should she cut?
She should be reducing tax for most people in the UK. She should be significantly increasing tax on the wealthy. The wealthy, as I've already said, massively underpay tax. So she should, for example, be finding her 18 billion of her 22 billion by imposing an investment income surcharge of 15% on investment incomes over 10,000 a year. And that would deliver 18 billion in my estimate. She should be equalising capital gains tax rates and income tax rates, and that could raise 12 billion a year in my estimate. She should be charging VAT on financial services, almost all of which are bought by the wealthy, of course, because nobody else has any reason to buy them, and that would raise 8 billion a year. There you are. I've answered all the points, but in fact I've raised more tax than is necessary, and if you read my tax and wealth report, I could find 90 billion a year, in fact, of extra tax paid only by the wealthy and not on people who work. And the answer to that is I could then cut tax on working people, and we would live in a better, stronger economy, because the people at the bottom of the pile, and you forget this when you talk about the wealthy, it isn't the wealthy who make wealth, it's the people who spend money with businesses who make wealth, and they haven't got enough money to make our businesses wealthy. So you need to cut tax for the lowest and charge it on the highest, because then we'd have stronger businesses, and in fact everybody, including the wealthy, would be better off. But whilst you concentrate on the wealthy, you will actually send this country into extinction.
Just a very final point, Richard. How do you define the wealthy? Is that somebody who is Alan Sugar, or is it somebody who's a lawyer that earns 200 grand a year?
Oh, God, less than 200 grand a year. Come on, let's be realistic. If you earn 100 grand a year, you're well into the top 3% or so. That means you are wealthy. You are exceptional. You're out of the ordinary. Of course you're wealthy.
On that point, Richard, thank you very much indeed. Richard Murphy, former chartered accountant, economic justice campaigner, infuriating guest, but I'm sure good to his kids.